The gunshot that killed 8-year-old Thomas Vaughn on a dusty September afternoon in 1878 was meant for someone else, but that never made the pain any easier for his father to bear. Harrison Vaughn stood at the edge of Snake River, Idaho, watching the water rush past with the same relentless force that carried away his will to live each morning he woke without his boy. The river town had grown prosperous from the Oregon Trail traffic passing through, but prosperity meant nothing when you buried your only child because a drunken prospector couldn't aim straight during a saloon dispute. Harrison had been a cattle rancher before, successful and driven, but now he just went through the motions, his hands doing the work while his heart remained in that small grave on the hillside. Felicity Turner arrived in Snake River on a Wednesday in late March of 1879, stepping off the stagecoach with nothing but a worn carpetbag and eyes that had seen too much sorrow for a woman of 26. She had traveled from Sacramento, where her 5-year-old daughter Emma had died of scarlet fever 6 months prior, taking with her all the light and laughter that had filled their small house. Felicity's husband had left 2 years before Emma's death, unable to handle fatherhood, and she had raised her daughter alone, which made the loss cut even deeper. There was no one to share the grief with, no one who understood the specific shape of the hole Emma had left behind. She came to Snake River because her cousin had written about work at the general store, and because Sacramento held nothing but memories that strangled her. Harrison first saw Felicity on a Thursday morning when he came into Miller's general store for supplies. She stood behind the counter, carefully measuring out flour for Mrs. Henderson, and something about the careful, mechanical way she moved reminded him of himself. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, and her face held a kind of composed emptiness that he recognized immediately. When their eyes met, there was a flash of understanding, the way 2 soldiers who had survived the same battle might recognize each other years later. He nodded, she nodded back, and he left with his supplies without saying a word beyond what was necessary. But Snake River was a small town, and their paths crossed again at church that Sunday. Felicity sat in the back pew, her hands folded in her lap, her lips moving during the hymns but no sound coming out. Harrison sat 3 rows ahead, his broad shoulders hunched, his work-roughened hands gripping the pew in front of him during the sermon about God's mercy. After the service, on the church steps, they nearly collided when both turned to leave at the same moment. "Pardon me," Harrison said, his voice rough from disuse. He was 32 but looked older, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. "No, excuse me," Felicity replied, stepping aside. Then, because something compelled her, she added, "You are Harrison Vaughn, aren't you? I have heard people mention your ranch." "That is right." He studied her face, seeing past the composed exterior to the grief underneath. "You are new to town, working at Miller's." "Felicity Turner. Yes, I arrived last week." She clutched her Bible tighter, and he noticed her knuckles were white. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, other churchgoers flowing around them like water around stones. Finally, Harrison said, "Welcome to Snake River, Miss Turner," and walked away, but he felt her watching him as he mounted his horse. The next time they spoke was 2 weeks later when Felicity was closing up the store at dusk. A group of rowdy cowboys from a neighboring ranch were making a commotion in the street, firing their pistols in the air in drunken celebration. The sound of gunfire sent Felicity stumbling backward into a shelf, her face white as chalk, glass jars crashing around her. Harrison, who had been walking past, saw her through the window and rushed inside. "Miss Turner." He reached her just as her knees gave out, catching her before she hit the floor. She was shaking violently, her breath coming in gasps. He helped her to a chair in the back room, away from the noise. "Easy now." Just breathe. They are just cowboys letting off steam. I know, she managed, her voice thin. I know that, but the sound it reminds me of. She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. Harrison knelt in front of her chair, his dark eyes steady on hers. Of something you would rather forget. Yes. The word came out as a whisper. The gunfire outside had stopped, but she was still trembling. He did not ask what. Instead, he said quietly, "My son died from a stray bullet. September of last year. Every time I hear gunfire, I am back in that moment, running toward him, knowing I am too late." Felicity's eyes filled with tears, and she stared at him with something like recognition. "My daughter," she said, and then her voice broke. "Scarlet fever, last September. I held her while she burned with fever, and there was nothing I could do, nothing." They sat in the growing darkness of the store's back room, two strangers connected by the worst kind of understanding. Harrison pulled up another chair and sat across from her, and they talked. Not about happy things, but about the weight of grief, about waking up each morning and having to remember all over again, about the way people in town looked at them with pity or discomfort, about the emptiness that never quite filled. "Some days I forget for just a moment," Felicity confessed, wiping her eyes with her handkerchief. "I wake up and start to call for Emma before I remember, and then the remembering is like dying all over again." "Yes," Harrison said, leaning forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "Exactly that. I will be working with the cattle, and I will think I need to remember to show Thomas this, and then—" He trailed off, his jaw clenching. "People tell me it will get easier," Felicity said bitterly. "They say time heals all wounds. But they do not understand that I do not want it to get easier. If the pain fades, does that mean I am forgetting her? How can I let her go?" "You cannot," Harrison said firmly. "And anyone who tells you otherwise has never lost a child." He stood up slowly. "Miss Turner, I should go. But if you ever need someone who understands, someone who will not tell you foolish platitudes about God's plan, I am at the Vaughn Ranch, 3 miles north of town." After he left, Felicity sat in the dark store for a long time, feeling something she had not felt since Emma died. A tiny flicker of connection to another human being. Spring turned to early summer, and Harrison found reasons to come to town more often. He needed supplies he did not really need. He had questions about inventory that could have waited. Each time, he and Felicity would talk, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes for an hour if the store was quiet. They talked about their children, keeping their memories alive in a way they could not with anyone else. Felicity told him about Emma's love of wildflowers, how she would pick enormous bouquets and present them solemnly like precious gifts. Harrison told her about Thomas's fascination with horses, how the boy could spend hours in the stable, talking to the animals as if they understood every word. One Saturday in June, Harrison worked up the courage to ask, "Would you like to come to the ranch for Sunday dinner? I know it is forward, but I thought you might enjoy getting out of town. It is peaceful out there." Felicity hesitated, then nodded. "I would like that, thank you." He picked her up after church in his wagon, and they rode out of town in comfortable silence. The ranch was beautiful, sprawling green pastures with the Sawtooth Mountains rising in the distance. The house was well built but clearly neglected, with a woman's touch long absent. Harrison helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle but brief on her waist. Inside, Felicity was surprised to find he had prepared a simple but decent meal. Roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables from his garden. "I've gotten better at cooking since my wife left," he explained, pulling out a chair for her. "She ran off with a traveling salesman when Thomas was 4. Could not handle ranch life," she said. "So it has been just me and the boy for years, and then just me." "I am sorry," Felicity said, sitting down. "That must have been difficult." It was. But Thomas and I, we managed. We were happy, the two of us." His voice caught. "We were so happy." During dinner, they talked more easily than before, the familiar territory of shared grief giving way to other topics. Felicity told him about growing up in Boston, how she had come west with her husband full of dreams, how those dreams had crumbled. Harrison told her about building the ranch from nothing, about his plans to expand the herd, plans that now seemed pointless. After dinner, they walked to the small family cemetery on the hill. There was only one grave, marked with a simple wooden cross. Harrison had carved Thomas's name himself, along with the dates and the words "beloved son." He stood looking at it, his hat in his hands. "I come here every day," he said quietly. "Morning and night. I tell him about my day, about the ranch, about everything. Some people would say I am talking to myself, but I need to believe he can hear me somehow." Felicity stepped closer to the grave, reading the inscription. "I do the same thing. Emma is buried in Sacramento, and leaving her there was the hardest thing I have ever done, but I write her letters. Pages and pages. I keep them in a box under my bed." Harrison turned to look at her, the late afternoon sun turning her hair to gold. "You understand," he said, and it was not a question. "I do," she replied, meeting his eyes. "I truly do." Something shifted between them in that moment on the hillside, standing between the living and the dead. It was not attraction exactly, not yet, but a recognition that here was someone who could hold the weight of grief without flinching, someone who would not try to fix what could not be fixed. As summer deepened, Harrison and Felicity began spending more time together. He would come to town on Sunday afternoons and they would walk along the river, talking about everything and nothing. She would tell him about difficult customers at the store, and he would tell her about problems with the cattle. Slowly, carefully, they began to talk about other things too. Books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had abandoned. One evening in July, they sat by the river watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Felicity had brought a picnic basket, and they had eaten bread and cheese while the water rushed past. Now, in the soft twilight, Harrison reached over and took her hand. She stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed, letting her fingers curl around his. "Is this all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "It is more than all right." They sat like that until the stars came out, not speaking, just holding hands and feeling less alone than they had in months. When Harrison finally drove her back to town, he helped her down from the wagon in front of her boarding house and said, "Felicity, I want you to know that I care about you. Not because you fill a hole or because misery loves company, but because you are a remarkable woman and I am grateful to know you." She looked up at him, surprised. "Harrison, I care about you too, but I do not know if I am ready for more than friendship. Some days I can barely breathe through the pain." "I know," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I am not asking for more than you can give. I just wanted you to know how I feel." But as the summer wore on, what they felt grew beyond friendship. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way Harrison's face lit up when he saw her, the way Felicity found herself thinking about him while she worked, the way they instinctively reached for each other when they walked. They began to realize that grief did not preclude love, that two broken people could find comfort and eventually joy in each other without betraying their lost children. In August, Harrison invited Felicity to stay at the ranch for a weekend to help him organize his late mother's recipes and household items, things he had never been able to face alone. She agreed, bringing her carpet bag and her courage. They worked side by side in the dusty attic, sorting through boxes of memories. When they found a box of Thomas's toys, Harrison sat down heavily, pulling out a carved wooden horse. "I made this for him," he said, his voice thick. For his 6th birthday. Felicity knelt beside him, putting her hand on his shoulder. It is beautiful. You are very talented. He loved it. He named it Thunder and took it everywhere. Harrison turned the toy over in his hands, tears running freely down his face. God, I miss him, Felicity. Every single day I miss him so much it feels like my chest is caving in. She wrapped her arms around him, and he buried his face in her shoulder and wept. She held him tightly, her own tears falling into his dark hair, and she understood that this was what love looked like now. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but showing up for someone's pain, holding them while they broke apart and trusting them to do the same for you. That night after dinner, they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness. Harrison took Felicity's hand and said, I want to tell you something, and I need you to know I mean it with my whole heart. I love you, Felicity Turner. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you understand the darkness without being swallowed by it. I love that you keep Emma alive with your stories and your letters. I love that you let me talk about Thomas without changing the subject. I do not want to replace what you lost, and I would never try. But I want to build something new with you, something that honors our children by proving that love can survive even the worst pain. Felicity was crying, but she was smiling too. I love you too, Harrison. I have been fighting it because I felt guilty, like loving you meant I was moving on from Emma. But I realize now that is not true. She will always be my daughter, and I will always grieve her. But I can grieve her and still choose to live, to love, to be happy again. He stood and pulled her to her feet, then cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her softly. It was a kiss full of tenderness and promise, and when they pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. Marry me, Harrison said suddenly. I know it is fast, but we are not young anymore and life is too short and too precious. Marry me and let us build a life together. Let us honor Thomas and Emma by living fully, by being happy, by maybe even having more children if God wills it. Yes, Felicity said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They were married in early September, a year after each had lost their child. It was a small ceremony in the Snake River Church, with only a few close friends in attendance. Felicity wore a simple blue dress, and Harrison wore his best suit. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Harrison did so with such love and reverence that several people in the congregation wiped away tears. After the ceremony, they held a small reception at the ranch. As the sun began to set, Harrison and Felicity slipped away to the hillside cemetery. They stood together at Thomas's grave, and Felicity laid a bouquet of wildflowers beside the wooden cross. "Thomas," Harrison said quietly, his arm around his new wife, "this is Felicity. She is my wife now, which makes her your stepmother in a way. I know you would have loved her. She is kind and brave and strong, and she understands what it means to lose someone you love more than life itself, because she lost her daughter Emma." He paused, his voice breaking. "I will never stop missing you, son. Never. But Felicity has helped me remember that I can miss you and still live. I hope you understand. I hope you would be happy for me." Felicity added softly, "Thomas, I promise to take care of your father, and I promise to keep your memory alive. Emma is watching over us too, I believe, and I think she and you would have been friends. Maybe you are friends now, wherever you are." They stood in silence for a moment, then walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to begin their new life together. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. There were nights when Felicity woke crying from dreams of Emma, and Harrison would hold her until the tears subsided. There were mornings when Harrison was silent and withdrawn, lost in memories of Thomas, and Felicity would sit with him quietly, not trying to fix it, but simply being present. They learned each other's grief patterns, the triggers and the comfort measures. They also learned each other's joys. Felicity loved to read aloud in the evenings, and Harrison loved to listen while he carved wood. Harrison loved to ride out early and watch the sunrise, and Felicity began joining him, wrapped in a warm shawl. They talked often about their lost children, keeping them present in their daily lives. At dinner, they would share memories. Emma loved carrots, Felicity would say, passing the bowl. Thomas hated them, Harrison would reply with a sad smile. They never tried to forget or to move on in the way well-meaning friends suggested. Instead, they created a life spacious enough to hold both grief and joy, sorrow and hope. In the spring of 1880, Felicity discovered she was pregnant. She told Harrison on a warm April evening while they were sitting on the porch. She was nervous, her hands shaking as she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Harrison, I am carrying a child, our child." He stared at her, shock and joy and fear warring on his face. "Truly?" "Truly. I am about 2 months along, I think. The baby should come in October." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, his face was wet with tears. "I am happy," he said fiercely, "but I am also terrified. What if something happens? What if I lose this child too? I do not think I could survive it, Felicity." "I know," she said, her own tears falling. "I am terrified too, but we cannot let fear steal our joy. This baby is a gift, and we will love him or her with everything we have. And if something happens—" Her voice broke. "If something happens, we will face it together like we have faced everything else." The pregnancy was difficult emotionally. Every pain, every moment of sickness sent both of them into panic. Harrison became overprotective, hovering constantly. Felicity swung between excitement and terror, sometimes unable to let herself believe that this baby would actually arrive safely. They went to the cemetery often, talking to Thomas and Emma about the coming baby, asking for their blessing and their protection for their new sibling. "I feel guilty," Felicity confessed one evening in July, her hand on her swelling belly. "I feel guilty for being happy about this baby when Emma is dead. It feels like I am replacing her." "You are not," Harrison said firmly, kneeling in front of her chair and taking both her hands. Emma was irreplaceable. So was Thomas. This child is not a replacement, it is an addition. It is proof that we survived, that we chose to love again despite the risk. Our lost children would want this for us, I truly believe that." "You think so?" Felicity asked, searching his face. "I know so. Thomas had the biggest heart of any child I have ever known. He would want me to be happy, to have a family to love. And I think Emma would want the same for you." As her due date approached, the tension in the household grew. Harrison barely slept, checking on Felicity constantly. She grew quiet and withdrawn, too afraid to hope. They had hired a midwife from town, an experienced older woman named Mrs. Patterson, who would stay at the ranch for the last month of the pregnancy. On October 15th, Felicity's labor began. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Harrison paced outside the bedroom, praying more fervently than he had since Thomas died. Inside, Felicity labored with all her strength, terrified but determined. She thought of Emma, of Thomas, of Harrison, and she pushed. Finally, as the sun was setting on October 16th, a baby's cry filled the house. Harrison burst into the room to find Mrs. Patterson holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "It is a boy," the midwife said, smiling broadly. "A healthy, strong boy." Harrison rushed to Felicity's side. She was exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but she was smiling. Mrs. Patterson placed the baby in her arms, and both parents stared at him in wonder. "He is perfect," Felicity whispered, counting fingers and toes. "He is truly perfect." "Thank you," Harrison said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for being brave enough to try again." They named him Henry Thomas Vaughn after Harrison's father and their lost son. As the days passed and Henry thrived, nursing hungrily and sleeping peacefully, some of the terror began to ease. They were still anxious parents, checking on him constantly, but they also began to relax into joy. One evening, when Henry was 2 weeks old, Harrison carried him up to the cemetery. Felicity walked beside them, wrapped in a shawl against the October chill. They stood at Thomas's grave, and Harrison held the baby close. "Thomas, this is your brother Henry. I wish you could meet him properly, but I hope somehow you know about him. I want you to know that having him does not mean we love you less or miss you less. You will always be my firstborn, my boy, but Henry is a blessing, and I think you would love him. I think you would be the best big brother." Felicity added, "Emma, this is Henry. He is your step-brother in a way, and I will tell him all about you as he grows. I will tell him about the sister and brother he has watching over him from heaven. You will always be part of this family, sweetheart. Always." They stood in the fading light, a small family connected across the boundary between life and death. Grief and joy intertwined so thoroughly they could no longer be separated. The years that followed were full. In the spring of 1882, Felicity gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Ruth and Grace. Harrison expanded the ranch, hiring more help so he could spend more time with his growing family. Felicity stopped working at the general store to focus on the children, but she never stopped writing letters to Emma, and Harrison never stopped visiting Thomas's grave. They taught their children about their lost siblings from the very beginning. Henry, Ruth, and Grace grew up knowing about Thomas and Emma, hearing stories about them, bringing flowers to Thomas's grave. It was not morbid or sad. It was simply part of their family story. They understood that their parents had loved before and lost before, and that this made them more appreciative of every moment they had together. In the summer of 1885, when Henry was almost 5, he asked Harrison, "Papa, do you think Thomas would like me?" Harrison, who was teaching him to ride, stopped and knelt down to his son's level. "Henry, I know Thomas would love you. He would think you were the best little brother in the whole world, and I think he does know you in some way. I think he watches over you." "I wish I could have met him," Henry said seriously. "And Emma too. Mama gets sad sometimes when she talks about her." "We both get sad," Harrison admitted, "because we love them very much and we miss them, but that is okay. It is okay to be sad about the people we have lost and happy about the people we have now. Both feelings can be true at the same time." Henry considered this, then nodded. "I understand, like how I can be sad when I get in trouble but still know you love me." "Exactly like that," Harrison said, pulling his son into a hug. "You are a smart boy, Henry." As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Harrison and Felicity became known in Snake River as a devoted couple, deeply in love and deeply committed to their family and community. They never forgot where they had come from, the depths of grief they had known, and that knowledge made them compassionate toward others who suffered loss. In the fall of 1888, 10 years after Thomas's death, Harrison and Felicity stood at the cemetery with all 3 children. It was a beautiful October day, the leaves turning gold and red, the air crisp and clean. They had brought flowers and had cleaned around the grave, and now they stood together as a family. "Children," Felicity said, her arms around the twins, "your father and I want you to understand something important. We love you 3 more than we can ever express. You are our joy and our purpose. But we also want you to know that you have a brother and a sister who came before you, who we loved just as much. Thomas and Emma will always be part of our family, and it is important to us that you remember them. "We will, Mama," Ruth said solemnly. Grace nodded, and Henry stepped forward to place his bouquet at the base of the cross. Harrison spoke next, his voice steady despite the emotion in it. "Thomas, my son, it has been 10 years since I lost you. Not a day has passed that I have not thought of you, missed you, wished you were here. But I want you to know that your death did not destroy me, even though it felt like it would. I found love again with Felicity, and together we have built a life that I think would make you proud. Your brother and sisters are wonderful children, and I tell them about you all the time. You are not forgotten, you will never be forgotten." Felicity added, "Emma, my darling girl, I carry you in my heart every moment of every day. This family we have built, this life we have created, it exists because I survived losing you. I survived because Harrison understood my pain and helped me bear it. I survived because I chose to live, to love, to hope again. I hope I have made you proud. I hope you are at peace." They stood in silence for a long moment. The 6 of them, 3 living children and 2 dead ones, all bound together by love and loss and the fierce determination of 2 people who refuse to let grief have the final word. That night, after the children were asleep, Harrison and Felicity sat on their porch in the rocking chairs they had bought years ago. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the sound of the river carried on the night air. "You ever regret it?" Felicity asked quietly. "Coming to town that day? Talking to me? Taking on all my grief along with your own?" Harrison reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Never. Not for a single moment. You saved my life, Felicity. I was drowning in grief before I met you, barely existing. You gave me a reason to live again." "You did the same for me," she said, squeezing his hand. "I do not think I would have survived without you. Certainly, I would not have found joy again. You showed me that it was possible to honor Emma's memory while still embracing life." "We saved each other," Harrison said simply. 2 broken people who understood each other's pain and chose to build something beautiful out of the wreckage. That is what I am most proud of in my life." "You still think about him every day?" Felicity asked. "Every single day," Harrison confirmed. "Every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. But now the thoughts are not just painful. Sometimes I can remember him and smile, remember the joy he brought me. The grief is still there, it will always be there, but it is not the only thing anymore." "I feel the same about Emma," Felicity said. "I write to her still, did you know that? Not as often, but still regularly. I tell her about her step-siblings, about the ranch, about her stepfather who loves her even though he never met her." "I do know," Harrison said gently, "and I love you for it. I love that you keep her alive. Just as I keep Thomas alive by talking to him, by telling our children about him, by living the kind of life he would have wanted for me." They rocked in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. Finally, Felicity said, "I am happy, Harrison. Despite everything we have been through, despite the losses we have endured, I am truly happy." "Is that strange?" "No," Harrison said firmly. "It is not strange at all. It is beautiful. It is what we have fought for. Happiness does not erase grief, and grief does not preclude happiness. They coexist like we learned all those years ago. And I am happy too, my love. So very happy." As they sat together in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other through shared grief and built a life of shared joy, the river rushed on below them, constant and eternal. Above them, the stars wheeled across the sky, and somewhere in that vast expanse, they believed, 2 children watched over them with love. Thomas and Emma, forever young, forever remembered, forever woven into the fabric of the family that survived them. The years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. Henry grew tall and strong, learning ranching from his father and developing a deep love for the land. The twins, Ruth and Grace, were as different as could be despite their identical faces. Ruth was quiet and studious, loving books and learning, while Grace was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring the hills. Harrison and Felicity loved watching them grow, loved the chaos and joy they brought. In 1892, when Henry was 12, he asked if he could learn woodcarving from his father. Harrison was moved, remembering how he had carved toys for Thomas. He taught Henry patiently, and the boy's first project was a small horse, carved carefully and sanded smooth. When he finished it, Henry took it to the cemetery and placed it at Thomas's grave. "For my brother," he said simply, and Harrison had to turn away to hide his tears. The twins, at 10 years old, had their own way of honoring the siblings they had never met. Ruth wrote a poem about an angel named Emma who watched over children, and she read it at Sunday school. Grace collected wildflowers all summer and dried them, making bouquets that she would take to Thomas's grave throughout the winter when fresh flowers could not be found. Felicity and Harrison watched their children honor Thomas and Emma's memories and felt a deep satisfaction. They had created a family where grief was acknowledged, where lost loved ones were remembered, where death was not a taboo subject, but simply a sad part of life that had to be faced with courage and love. In the winter of 1894, a harsh blizzard hit the region. The family was snowed in for nearly 2 weeks, the ranch blanketed in white, the river frozen solid. During those long days and nights huddled together, they told stories, played games, read books, and talked about everything under the sun. One evening, by the fire, Harrison told the children the full story of how he and their mother had met and fallen in love. "Your mother and I were both broken when we met," he said. Felicity nestled against his side. "I had lost Thomas and she had lost Emma, and we were both barely surviving. But we understood each other's pain in a way no one else could. That understanding became friendship, and friendship became love. We saved each other, your mother and I. We gave each other a reason to keep living, to keep loving, to keep hoping." "It sounds like a fairy tale," Ruth said dreamily. "It was not," Felicity said gently. "It was hard and painful, and we both cried many, many tears. But it was also beautiful because we learned that love can grow even in the darkest soil. We learned that two people who have been broken can help each other heal. We will never be fully healed, not from losing Thomas and Emma, but we have built a good life despite that." "Because of that," Harrison corrected. "We built a good life because of those losses. They taught us what was important. They taught us not to take a single moment for granted. Every day with you three is a gift that we appreciate because we know how quickly children can be taken from us." Henry, Ruth, and Grace absorbed this, understanding in their own ways that their family was special, built on a foundation of grief transformed into love. By 1896, the Vaughn family was well established in Snake River. Harrison's ranch was one of the most successful in the region, and he had become a respected member of the community. Felicity had started a small school on the ranch, teaching not just her own children but several others from neighboring families who could not easily get to town. She was known as a patient, kind teacher who had a special understanding of children who struggled or grieved. One afternoon in June, a young couple came to the ranch seeking advice. They had lost their infant son to illness and were drowning in grief. Somehow they had heard that Harrison and Felicity might understand, might be able to help. Felicity met them at the door and immediately recognized the hollow look in their eyes, the way they moved as if underwater. She invited them in, made tea, and sat with them while they cried and raged and despaired. "It does not get better," Felicity told them honestly. "Not in the way people mean when they say that. The pain does not go away, but it changes. It becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you. You learn to live with it, around it, through it. And eventually, if you are very lucky, you find moments of joy again. Small at first, then bigger. You never forget your child, never stop missing them, but you learn that you can miss them and still have a life worth living. Harrison added, "The key is finding someone who understands. My wife and I, we understood each other's grief, and that made all the difference. You have each other. Do not pull apart in your pain. Pull together. Grieve together. Remember your son together. And when you are ready, live together. Build something that honors his memory by being beautiful and good and full of love." The couple left hours later, still grieving but somehow lighter, knowing they were not alone. Over the years, this became a pattern. People who had lost children sought out the Vaughns, knowing they would find understanding and compassion. Harrison and Felicity never turned anyone away. They shared their story, their struggles, their hard-won wisdom. They became known as healers of a sort, though they always insisted they had not healed, only learned to live with their wounds. In 1898, when Henry was 18 and preparing to take over more responsibility on the ranch, he fell in love with a young woman from town named Sarah Mitchell. Harrison and Felicity approved wholeheartedly. Sarah was kind and hardworking, and she understood about Thomas and Emma, accepting them as part of the family history without question. The wedding was held at the ranch in September, a joyous occasion with the whole town invited. As Harrison danced with Felicity at the reception, both of them watching their son with his new bride, Felicity said, "Thomas would be 28 now. He might have been married, might have had children of his own." "I know," Harrison said, pulling her closer. "I think about that often. What he would have become, who he would have married, what kind of man he would have been. But I also know that I cannot torture myself with what-ifs. Thomas died, and that is a tragedy I will carry forever, but we did not die with him. We chose to live and look at what we have built." "Do you think we did right by him?" Felicity asked. "By having more children, by being happy, by moving forward." "I think we did the only thing we could," Harrison replied. "We honored his memory by not letting grief destroy us. We honored him by loving fiercely, by building a family, by creating joy out of sorrow. And I think, wherever he is proud of us." Felicity rested her head on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. "I hope Emma feels the same. I hope she knows that every good thing in my life, every moment of happiness, is partly because of her. She made me a mother. She taught me what love truly means. And even though she is gone, those lessons remained." The twins married within a year of each other, Ruth to a school teacher from Boys and Grace to a cavalry officer stationed at Fort Hall. Harrison and Felicity became grandparents in 1901 when Henry and Sarah had a daughter. They named her Emma Felicity Vaughn, and when Felicity first held her namesake, she wept for an hour, overwhelmed by the bittersweet beauty of having her lost daughter's name live on. As the new century progressed, Harrison and Felicity grew older but never apart. They remained deeply in love, still holding hands on the porch, still talking about Thomas and Emma, still visiting the cemetery every Sunday. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a large, sprawling family. 3 children, multiple grandchildren, a network of love that extended throughout the region. In the spring of 1908, on a warm May afternoon, Harrison and Felicity celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, with family and friends coming from miles around. As the sun set and the party wound down, Harrison and Felicity slipped away to their favorite spot, the cemetery on the hill. Thomas's wooden cross had been replaced years ago with a proper headstone, carved with his name and dates, and the words "Forever loved," "Forever remembered," "Forever our son." They had added a smaller marker next to it for Emma, even though her body lay in Sacramento. It read, "Emma Turner, beloved daughter, forever in our hearts." They stood between the markers, Harrison's arm around Felicity's waist, her head on his shoulder. They were in their late 50s now, their hair gray, their faces lined, but the love between them was as strong as ever. 30 years, Felicity marveled. 30 years of marriage, of partnership, of love, and it all started because we understood each other's pain. "Best decision I ever made," Harrison said, kissing the top of her head. "Talking to you that day in the store, inviting you to the ranch, asking you to marry me. All of it. You have been my partner in everything, Felicity. In grief and in joy, in sorrow and in celebration. I could not have asked for a better wife or a better mother for my children." "Our children," Felicity corrected gently. "Thomas is ours now too, just as Emma is yours. That is what we decided when we married, remember? We would share everything, including our grief and our lost children." "You are right," Harrison said. "Our children, all 5 of them." He looked at the gravestones, then back toward the ranch house where their living children and grandchildren were gathered. "We have been so blessed, my love. Despite everything, despite the losses and the pain, we have been incredibly blessed." "We have," Felicity agreed. "And it is because we chose to be. We chose to love again when it would have been easier to give up. We chose to hope again when despair seemed more reasonable. We chose life over death, joy over sorrow, not instead of our grief, but alongside it." They stood in the fading light, 2 people who had found each other in the depths of sorrow and built a life of profound love and purpose. The wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. Their grandchildren, playing in the twilight, unaware that they were the living testament to their grandparents' courage and resilience. "You still grieve them?" Harrison asked softly. "After all these years, do you still grieve Emma?" "Every single day," Felicity replied without hesitation. "Not with the same raw intensity as before, but the grief is always there, a quiet ache that never fully goes away. And I would not want it to. That grief is proof of how much I loved her, how much she meant to me. The day I stop grieving Emma is the day I stop being her mother, and I will be her mother until I die." "I feel the same about Thomas," Harrison said. "Every single day I think about him. I grieve him. I miss him. But I also celebrate him, remember the joy he brought me, and honor him by living well. That is what love looks like in the face of loss." As the stars began to appear overhead, they walked slowly back to the ranch house, where their family waited. Behind them, 2 small graves stood in silent testimony to love that transcended death, to grief that coexisted with joy, to 2 people who understood each other's pain and built something beautiful because of it. The years that followed were kind to Harrison and Felicity. They grew old together, still in love, still partners in everything. They welcomed more grandchildren than great-grandchildren. They became legends in Snake River, the couple who had lost everything and built it all back again, the couple whose love story was rooted in shared grief and blossomed into something extraordinary. In 1920, at the age of 72, Harrison fell ill with pneumonia. Felicity nursed him devotedly, but they both knew he was dying. On a cold February night, surrounded by his family, Harrison Vaughn took his wife's hand and smiled. "I am going to see Thomas," he said, his voice weak but certain. "I am finally going to see my boy again." "Tell him I love him," Felicity said through her tears. "Tell him his mother loves him and has never forgotten him." "I will," Harrison promised. "And when you come, Emma will be waiting for you. We will all be together then." He died peacefully an hour later, Felicity holding his hand. Their children gathered around them. At his funeral, the entire town turned out and person after person spoke of his kindness, his wisdom, his deep capacity for love. He was buried on the hillside next to Thomas, his headstone reading Harrison Vincent Vaughn, beloved husband, father, and friend, now reunited with his son. Felicity lived another 5 years, surrounded by her loving family but lonely without Harrison. She spent her days teaching, writing letters to Emma, and talking to Harrison's grave. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1925 at the age of 73, her last words were reported to be, "I am coming, Emma. Mama is coming." She was buried next to Harrison on his other side, so that he lay between his first son and his great love. Her headstone read, "Felicity Me Vaughn, beloved wife, mother, and friend, forever united with her daughter." The 4 graves became a landmark of sorts: Thomas Vaughn, Emma Turner, Harrison Vaughn, and Felicity Vaughn, 2 lost children and the parents who found each other through grief and built a legacy of love. For generations, their descendants would visit the hillside cemetery, bringing flowers and telling stories about the couple who proved that love could bloom even in the darkest soil, that joy could coexist with sorrow, and that 2 broken people could create something whole and beautiful together. Their story became a legend in Snake River, passed down through the years. The tale of a cowboy who grieved his son every single day, a woman who grieved her daughter every single day, and how they understood each other's pain so deeply that understanding became love, and love became a legacy that touched countless lives. They had faced unimaginable loss and chosen not just to survive, but to truly live, to love fiercely, to build a family and a future that honored the children they had lost by being beautiful and full of grace. And in the end, they had found what they had both needed most: someone who understood, someone who would carry the grief alongside them, someone who proved that even the most broken hearts could learn to beat strongly again when held with gentle, understanding hands.